There is a sentence in the Bible that should stop you cold the moment you read it. Not because it is confusing, not because it is ancient, but because it is clear, shockingly, almost offensively clear, and what it says should not be there. The book of Hosea. Chapter 1, verse 2. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take to yourself a wife of whoredom." That is the command. That is how the book begins. No preamble, no softening, no theological disclaimer. God speaks to a prophet, a man of moral standing, a man of serious spiritual reputation, and the first thing he says is, "Go marry a woman who will not be faithful to you." Now, I want you to pause on that for a moment, because the instinct of most people when they encounter that sentence is to immediately reach for the interpretation, to rush toward the metaphor, to say, well, of course, it represents Israel's relationship to God. And that is true, but there is a danger in arriving at the meaning before you have allowed the strangeness to fully register. Because before it is a metaphor, it is a life. It is a man's actual marriage. A real woman named Gomer, real children, real heartbreak, real abandonment, and eventually, and this is the part that should utterly shatter you, a real auction block. So before we get to what this story means, we need to understand what this story cost, and what it reveals about a kind of love that is not romantic, not sentimental, and not safe, but that may be the most honest and revolutionary idea about love that any human culture has ever produced. Let's go to the 8th century before Christ. Let's go to Israel. The nation is, on the surface, doing rather well. The reign of Jeroboam II has brought military victories and economic expansion. The borders of Israel are at their widest in generations. The markets are full. The powerful are building houses of ivory, and we know this not only from Hosea but from the prophet Amos, who was preaching at roughly the same time, and couldn't stop talking about how the wealthy were living in obscene luxury, while the poor were being sold for the price of a pair of sandals. This is the world Hosea walks in, a world of glittering surfaces and rotting foundations, a world where the priests have become complicit in idol worship, where the high places dedicated to Baal are packed with worshippers who also show up for the Sabbath, who also call themselves the people of God, and who see no contradiction in this. A world where faithfulness has been replaced by functionality, where religion has become performance rather than relationship. Hosea's entire prophetic ministry before the marriage, before Gomer, before any of that, his whole calling is to preach about faithfulness, to call Israel back to the covenant they made with the God who brought them out of Egypt. He preaches against spiritual adultery. He rails against the chasing of foreign gods. He uses the language of betrayal and unfaithfulness, of a husband abandoned by a wandering wife. And then God says, I want you to stop preaching it. I want you to live it. I want you to think about what that means for a moment. Hosea is not a new recruit. He is not a young idealist who doesn't fully understand what he is signing up for. He is a prophet. He knows what unfaithfulness looks like at a national scale. He has spent his ministry describing it, condemning it, mourning it, and God essentially says, "You have described this wound from the outside for long enough. Now I am going to put you inside the wound, and you will understand what I have been feeling about this nation in a way that no amount of preaching could have taught you." This is one of the most extraordinary things about the divine pedagogy in Scripture. God does not only speak words. He sometimes creates situations. He sometimes builds classrooms out of suffering. He chose Hosea not simply to deliver a message, but to become one. So Hosea obeys. And this is where we need to slow down and sit with the humanity of the man, because the text is almost brutally brief about it. It says, "So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim." That's it. One sentence. No protest recorded, no negotiation, no scene of Hosea wrestling with God in anguish the night before the wedding. He simply goes. He marries her. Now, either Hosea was extraordinarily obedient to a degree that borders on the inhuman, or, and I think this is far more likely, the text is not recording his inner life in detail because the point is not his process. The point is his action. But do not let the brevity of the account fool you into thinking he felt nothing. The poetry that comes later in this book, the raw, aching, furious, tender poetry of chapters 2 and 3, that is the inner life. That is what it cost him. The formal obedience of chapter 1 and the emotional devastation of chapters 2 and 3 belong to the same man. He married her. 3 children were born, and God gave each child a name that reads like a verdict on the nation. The first, a son, is named Jezreel, after the valley where a royal dynasty had been wiped out in blood. The second, a daughter, is named Lo Ruhamah, which means no mercy, or not pitied. The third, another son, is named Lo Ami, which means not my people. 3 children, 3 names, 3 indictments. Even the births are prophecy, and then Gomer leaves. The text doesn't give us the exact moment or the exact circumstances. What it gives us is the aftermath. Chapter 2 of Hosea begins with God speaking, but the voice of God in this chapter is inseparable from the voice of a betrayed husband. The scholars debate it. Is this God speaking about Israel, or is this Hosea speaking about Gomer? The answer, I think, is that the text is deliberately constructed to blur that line. Because that is the point. God is saying what I am feeling about Israel is exactly what this man is feeling about his wife. This is not approximation, this is equivalence. And what does that voice say? It says, "She went after her lovers and forgot me. She said, I will go after my lovers who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink." She ran toward the things she thought would sustain her. She forgot who had actually been providing everything. She chased after the appearance of provision and abandoned the source of it. There is something here that is not just ancient. There is something here that is extraordinarily modern. The human capacity to run toward the things that look like they will satisfy. Comfort, status, pleasure, validation, the next relationship, the next experience, and in doing so to walk away from the deepest love and the truest connection we have ever known. Gomer is not a cautionary tale about a bad woman in a distant century. Gomer is a portrait of a tendency that lives in every human heart. I know that is uncomfortable. I know the natural instinct is to sit on Hosea's side of this story, to feel sympathy for the wronged party, to see Gomer as the villain and Hosea as the victim. And there is truth in that reading. But if that is the only way you read this story, you are protecting yourself from its most important invitation. Because the question the book of Hosea eventually insists on is not, wasn't it terrible what Gomer did? The question is, do you see yourself in her? And most of us, if we are honest, really honest, not theologically performative but genuinely transparent about our lives, most of us know what it is to have walked away from something or someone that deserved our faithfulness. Most of us know what it is to chase after things that promised to fill us and left us emptier than before. Most of us know what it is to have been Gomer at some point, and the story of Hosea is written for exactly that person. But we are not yet at the part that should devastate you. We are not yet at the auction block, because Gomer does not merely leave, she spirals. The text, read carefully alongside the historical context of the period, paints a picture of a woman whose choices lead her progressively downward, away from the security of Hosea's household, through a series of relationships that become increasingly transactional, until she finds herself in a position of debt, of dependency, of bondage. She ends up on a says to Hosea, "Go." Chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. These may be the most theologically dense sentences in the entire Old Testament. Let me read them carefully, because every word matters. The Lord said to me, "Go, show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they have turned to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley." God says, go show your love to your wife again. The word there in Hebrew is the word that will become central to everything in a moment, the word that holds the entire book of Hosea together. Love her, not as a gesture, not as a theological exercise, as a continuing reality. Go love her again. And then Hosea goes. He finds her, he sees her on the auction block. He pays 15 shekels of silver. The standard price for a slave in that period was 30 shekels. He paid half. He paid whatever was necessary to bring her home, and what was necessary was a humiliatingly small amount of money, which tells us something devastating about how far she had fallen and what her life had become. I want you to build this scene in your mind, because I think we tend to read it too quickly, as a narrative beat in a larger story, and we miss the human reality of it. Hosea walks into a marketplace, not a dignified place, a place where people are bought and sold. He has been betrayed by this woman repeatedly. She shattered his household. She abandoned his children. She chased other men. She made his life a public spectacle of humiliation, and now she is being auctioned off like livestock. He could have moved on. He could have grieved what was lost and rebuilt his life. He could have said, and who would have blamed him, she made her choices. She is where she is because of those choices. This is not my responsibility anymore. Instead, he walks into the market. He sees her. He bids. He pays. He brings her home. And he says to her in verse 3, with a tenderness that should break something open inside you, "You are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way toward you. You are to live with me, not, I am doing you a favor, not, you owe me, not. Here are the conditions of your re-entry. Simply, you are to live with me. Come home." This is not a sentimental moment. This is not the reunion scene in a romantic film. This is something harder than sentiment and more revolutionary than romance. This is a man choosing, deliberately at cost, against every social norm and every reasonable emotional calculation, to honor a covenant that the other person has already destroyed. This is theology in flesh and bone. And now we need to talk about a Hebrew word, because without this word we are left with a beautiful story of human reconciliation. But with this word we understand that what Hosea did was not exceptional human love. It was an earthly enactment of something that exists at the very foundation of reality. The word is Hesed. It appears 247 times in the Hebrew Old Testament. It has been translated into English in so many different ways that the sheer variety of translations is itself a kind of confession. No single English word can hold it. Loving kindness, steadfast love, mercy, faithfulness, covenant loyalty, grace. Each translation captures a piece of it. None of them captures all of it, because Hesed is not primarily an emotion. That is the first thing to understand. Our culture tends to define love as a feeling, an attraction, a warmth, a positive emotional state towards someone. Hesed is not that, or rather it is not only that. Hesed is a decision. It is the decision to remain bound to someone, to honor the covenant you made with them, even when every circumstance and every legal and moral precedent would excuse you from that obligation. Hesed is what you owe someone when you have made a promise, even after they have broken every promise they made back to you. In the ancient Near Eastern context in which this word was born, Hesed operated within covenants, formal agreements between parties. And the astonishing thing that the Old Testament does with this word is apply it to God's relationship with Israel. God has entered into a covenant with this people, and even when this people has violated every term of that covenant, even when they have gone to other gods and forgotten his name and built altars to Baal and sold justice and exploited the poor, God's Hesed remains. This is the word that Hosea 6:6 uses in what is perhaps the most direct statement of God's desire in the entire Old Testament. For I desire Hesed and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. God is saying, I don't want your religious performance. I don't want your rituals and your ceremonies and your correct liturgical behavior as a substitute for the thing itself. I want Hesed. I want the real thing, the loyal, costly, unbreakable thing. I want you to understand what love that cannot quit actually looks like. And God chose to demonstrate what Hesed looks like by embedding it in a human story. He chose to show it through a marriage, through an auction block, through 15 shekels of silver and a man who did not have to go but went anyway. This is why the command at the beginning of Hosea is not cruel. It looks cruel at first, and I understand why. A good man is being handed a devastating assignment. But what God was doing was not simply giving Hosea a difficult task. He was giving Hosea an education in the nature of divine love that no vision, no verbal revelation, no theological treatise could have provided. He was letting Hosea feel, from the inside, what it is like to love someone who keeps running, to want someone who keeps choosing everything else, to reach toward someone who keeps turning away, and then, this is the crucial part, to keep going anyway. Hosea did not learn about Hesed. Hosea became an instance of it, and because he did, he could write about it with an authority that transforms everything he says. When Hosea writes in chapter 11, How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? My heart is changed within me, all my compassion is aroused. That is not abstract theology. That is a man who has felt exactly that anguish in his own home, over his own wife, and who now understands that this is what the heart of God sounds like, every single day. Now I want to bring this to you personally, because I think this is where the story either becomes real or remains a historical curiosity. Most of us have a Hosea in our lives, someone who has loved us with a faithfulness we did not deserve. Maybe a parent who came back for you after you had written off the relationship. Maybe a friend who showed up for you at the lowest point, the point when you had given them every reason to stay away. Maybe, and perhaps you need a moment with this one, maybe it is God himself who you have run from, or ignored or replaced with lesser things, and who, inexplicably, still appears to be present when you finally stop running. And most of us, if we are honest with the deepest and least comfortable parts of ourselves, have also been Gomer. We have chased things that could not ultimately hold us. We have walked away from commitments we made when life felt simpler. We have traded real connection for the appearance of it, and we have ended up in places we never expected to be, worth less than we once imagined we were, wondering if anyone would still come. The staggering claim of the book of Hosea, the claim that should either collapse under its own audacity or entirely reorient your understanding of what God is like, is this: He comes. Not because you have earned your way back, not because you have sufficiently improved, not because you have satisfied the moral conditions for your own redemption. He comes because that is what Hesed does. It goes to the auction block, it pays whatever the price is, it brings you home. Hosea chapter 2, verse 14. In the middle of a passage that has been describing Israel's unfaithfulness and the consequences of it, God suddenly shifts. Therefore I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. The wilderness, the very place of desolation. The place you end up when everything has fallen apart. And that is where God says, that's where I'll meet you. That's where I'll speak tenderly. Not after you have climbed back out. In the wilderness. In the auction block. In the moment of lowest worth. This is the scandal that the book of Hosea refuses to resolve. Because God did not have to design the story this way. He could have given Hosea a successful marriage and used it as a picture of what Israel should aspire to. He could have illustrated his love through prosperity and straightforwardness and mutual devotion. But he didn't. He chose the hard story. He chose the betrayal and the auction block and the half-price purchase and the painful homecoming. He chose the most offensive, uncomfortable, undignified version of the story. Because I think the sanitized version would not have reached us. We would have admired it from a distance. We would have said, how lovely, what a beautiful picture of love. But when you hear about a man walking into a slave market to buy back the woman who destroyed his life, something inside you either recoils or breaks open. And the breaking open is the point. You cannot receive a love this large through the ordinary channels of polite religious agreement. It has to crack something. It has to disturb something. It has to find you where you actually are, not where you have presented yourself to be. Hosea's obedience was a kind of martyrdom, not of life, but of pride, of the very human and very understandable desire to be the kind of person who is not publicly humiliated, who is not the subject of a community's gossip, who does not walk into a slave auction to buy back a woman who has made a fool of him. He killed that desire over and over again because he was called to. And in killing it, he became the truest portrait of divine love that any human being has ever lived. The question the book leaves you with is not, wasn't Hosea remarkable? The question is, do you believe this love exists? And do you believe it is directed at you specifically in the actual conditions of your actual life? Not the life you present to the world. The real one. The one with the parts you don't talk about, the choices you regret, the relationships you damaged, the version of yourself you left behind somewhere you would rather not revisit. The auction block you ended up on, in whatever form that took for you. Because the book of Hosea is not primarily a book about Israel. It is not primarily a book about the 8th century before Christ. It is a book about a love that has decided, before you ever ran, before you ever wandered, before you ever made the choices you made, that it will come for you, that it will find you, that it will pay whatever is required, and it will bring you home. That is not a comfortable message. Comfort would be, do better, try harder, make yourself worthy of love, and then love will arrive. That is the message we are culturally conditioned to receive. That is the transaction model of relationship that runs so deep in us we barely notice it anymore. Hosea's message, God's message spoken through the ruins of one man's marriage, is the opposite of that. It says the love came first. It came before you earned it, before you deserved it, before you even knew you needed it. And it will come last too. When you have spent everything and are worth less than you imagined and are standing on a block you never thought you would reach, it will be there. 15 shekels and a handful of barley. Whatever the price is, it will be paid. That is Hesed. That is the love that has no exit. That is what Hosea spent his life demonstrating at enormous personal cost, so that you and I, thousands of years later, sitting with our own versions of unfaithfulness and our own private auction blocks, could hear it and perhaps, finally, believe it. The story of Hosea and Gomer is not a strange detour in the Bible. It is one of its clearest windows into the heart of God, and the view through that window is not tidy. It is not comfortable. It is not the kind of love you would design if you were trying to make God seem dignified and in control and untouchable by human mess. It is the kind of love that walks into the mess on purpose. That gets its hands into it. That pays the price that no one asked it to pay, that no one could have demanded of it, that it pays entirely because it has decided to, because this is what covenant means, because this is what Hesed is, because this is who God is. Hosea obeyed a command that should not have existed, and in obeying it, he taught us something that should change everything about how we understand both love and ourselves. You are not too far gone. You are not too broken. You are not worth too little. The one who loves you already knows where you are, and he is already on his way.